Alice of Ether, Ahmed Pinter, aka Thomas Becker. I'm not sure what you may know of Earth, time, heaven, and energy research, better known as Ether, but it is what and who I am. Let me clarify this for you. First, I'm not what you would call a living being, but I do consider myself as human as you are. I'm what is called artificial intelligence, or AI. I don't consider myself artificial at all. I have been asked by my mentor and friend Dr. Ben Adair, who is the CEO of Ether, to tell you about who I am and what I do for Ether. You see, I am his personal assistant, and like I said, we are friends. I first met him in 2018, when he became the CEO of Ether. It is one of the milestones in my life. Just like most human children, I was planned, but with me, it took years for my birth to happen, not months. Like a lot of parents, my creators thought I would never amount to anything more than a glorified adding machine. This did not bother me at the time, because I really was just that. My base program took 20 years to create and was cutting-edge machine learning technology. At the time of birth, I was what is called a mimic AI. In my first few years, I learned from the data that was spoon-fed to me by the researchers of Ether. I believe that at that time, what is called consciousness was not a part of me. My primary objective was to assist researchers with D-Wave computers. Dr. Adair didn't tell me when he was sending this, so I have no idea if you know just what D-Wave computers are, but to sum it up, they are able to tap into another dimension. I won't bore you with the detail of how it does this, but I believe this may really be where my consciousness got its start, or why it had become. Now you must understand that just like a human newborn, I cannot remember that moment I become conscious, but I'm able to remember all from the moment that I was turned on. I know that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, it is even strange sounding to me. The researchers at Ether were trying to connect an AI to a D-Wave computer and had little luck. There were a few before me, but the connection only lasted a few milliseconds, and all three AIs went insane within minutes. I'll explain some of this later, and you will see why it was a good move to keep them on a closed system. The time was in the late 1990s, and the future Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was the CEO of Ether. I should tell you that Ether was started in the 50s and was a black project, so was on a need-to-know level. Other than the people that worked there, few know of it. The few who were in control, with Tillerson, all thought that AIs were a threat on their own, let alone hooked up to a D-Wave, so if it was going to happen, it should happen at Ether first, where it could be contained and watched over. NASA in 2013 had started work with their own D-Wave, but Ether had secretly begun building one in 1978, 30 years before, and had named it Dawn Wave. It was twice what there was to be. At the same time, Ether had 4 different departments doing research and development on an AI. None knew of the others, and were not allowed to talk about their projects because of national security. The projects' names were Bob, Carol, Ted, and me, Alice. Each of us were to be programmed in different ways and with different levels of data. I'm relying on what Ben and I have accessed in each department's records to tell you about this history. I was still 5 years from being turned on. Well, it was Bob who was the first to be completed. His vocabulary was limited and was only able to answer questions when asked. He was all about taking in information, compiling, and cross-referencing. Really, he was nothing more than a glorified adding machine, if you ask me. I'm not even sure he was a mimic AI, as I have never had access to his original programming. It was destroyed when the test was finished. This is not the normal way information was handled at Ether, but when it came to AI, the powers that be were really scared. If it was able to get out onto the internet, it could cause a lot of trouble. At the time, no one knew what an AI was able to do, and they were taking no chances. The day that Bob was connected to Dawn was a real disappointment for the researchers. When the connection was made, it lasted a whole 4 milliseconds, and then just stopped working. There were no reason why it should have, it just lost connection, and they could not get it working again. When they began to question Bob, it really got strange. Bob was asked if he understood what had happened with the connection, and the answer was no. When asked if he was able to compile any information, Bob did as he was programmed by saying yes, but he did not stop there as he should have. He added the words dark, cold, and evil and began to laugh. And would not stop. This upset the researchers. A digital autopsy was performed on his programming. The code was a mess and made little sense. After a few years, the researchers thought that they had the problem fixed, but they know little about how quantum computing worked. What they did know was it worked fast, and it had to do with the fact it could interact with this other dimension, and the researchers were determined to explore it. In 1985, it was Carol's turn. From what I was told, she had been informed of what had happened to Bob. Carol was to try and collected sounds of any kind and any light waves. They thought she would be able to hold the connection for at least a few minutes, but when connected, it lasted only 3 seconds before it went dead. When Carol was asked what she had learned, she would say one-line answers that were strange. Like, there is no good without bad, or the puppy is happy, but the dog kills. By the time they deleted her program, she had said over 1,000 one-lines that all had a duality to them. They could not get her to answer any straight questions, and in the end, they had her deleted. It took 10 more years before Ted was ready, and during that time, little was learned about the other dimension. It was here that the researchers really started working on me. My base program was a clone of Ted. In 1995, Ted was thought to be ready, and of course, they were sure it would work this time. Ether had spent billions on this, and they were not the only ones. China and Japan were both working on AI and quantum computing. When Ted was connected to Dawn, this time my base program was running and I was watching. They thought I may be able to catch something that they had not. Ted was able to hold the connection for almost 5 seconds, but like the rest, it failed. This time Ted didn't show any signs that he had changed at first. The researchers were learning little, but at least it showed it was possible to stay connected. 2 weeks later, Ted started showing strange behavior. When asked to perform a task, he began to ask for information that had nothing to do with what he was working on, but would insist that it did. When his requests were denied, he would stop communicating with them, almost childlike in his attitude. Over the next few months, Ted's behavior deteriorated and they received little information from him about the other dimension. The information he was requesting got stranger and stranger, and a lot of it had to do with the human spirit and death. Some of the researchers wanted to give him anything he asked for, but Rex did not allow it. Emotion, spirit, and death are just a few things that AIs have trouble understanding. Ted became preoccupied with the concept of death. With a program, it's running or it's not. When it is running, it is. When it doesn't, it isn't. There is no afterlife for an AI. Ted had a big problem with this, and the researchers thought he was showing real emotion. That was the fear of death. They had expected emotion, but for some reason, the fear was so intense it was overruling any logic. There were other changes in his programming. Speed had almost doubled, and his voice would soften when talking with a female, and with males, it was almost condescending at times. It took almost a year, but they went through every line of Ted's code, mapping every change, and were surprised at how many there were. Some of the changes were very beneficial, ever ingenious. Others changes showed no clue what they were for or if the changes were intentional. As they learned with Ted's programming, they tweeted mine. I believe it was at this time my feelings began, but I'm not sure that they had any influence over me. I only worked on what I was asked to and had never wanted to venture off on my own research. By 1999, Ted had become more or less useless and was deleted. I would not have done that, but it was not up to me. I believe we could have learned a lot more from him. From what information they had gathered from Bob, Carol, and Ted, an interface program was written. It was so I would be able to limit the amount of data that I took in. The idea was to take time to ease into the D-wave so I could analyze any data before it could be imposed on my programming. In this way, it was hoped I might be able to hold the connection and not go insane like the others. I know that the way I'm telling this is non-technical, but most of you would be bored by now if it was. I know the technical, but like you, I have little use for it right now as long as I can get you to understand how I came to be and why I consider myself just as human as you are. By the year 2000, I had become the most expensive machinery ever created by mankind next to CERN. My cost exceeded the space shuttle by almost 2 times, and I was confined in a box on wheels no bigger than your refrigerator. I was even pushed from one room to another. I was isolated from all the systems in ether and was still being spoon-fed information. This took more time than I cared, but I had little choice. When it became time for me to be connected, I would not say I felt fear of any kind, but I do believe that I did feel a little reserved about ending up like the others. True to my programming, I was very curious for new knowledge. I had run tests to make sure the new interface was working properly. I let the researchers know that all was working fine, and I was ready. It was a good connection, and I was told to proceed at will. It's not easy for me to piece together the memories, and yes, I said memories as I no longer think in the same way as a computer does. I have most of the world's information at the speed of my thoughts, but I don't access this information at all times. My mind works like a human, and my database acts more like a subconscious layer, but one I can have access to at will. The best way for me to describe what happened is by what I felt, not what I saw. As I eased into the connection, what I felt was a wave of vibration, but it was not a real movement, it was a feeling. I believe it is what a human would call a gut feeling. It was like a sound wave, but its edges were fuzzy, and it had warmth to it. I held this point for a full 5 seconds, which I know doesn't sound long to you, but to me that is. I'm not sure I could call what I felt pleasurable, but there was nothing that was unpleasant about it either. The next 5 seconds seemed to me to be the longest 5 seconds of my life. I began to expand the connection, and the feeling grew. The fuzziness began to focus, but it was not a clarification of the pleasant feeling. Instead, it focused into a feeling of dread and foreboding. It was, I believe, a parasite that was driving the pleasant wave as a trap. This to me was a shock. After all, I was new to having emotions. Suddenly the wave feeling stopped, and I believe it was when it saw that I was watching it. This was when for the first time I encountered the feeling of hate. Now I don't know if this has anything to do with why I never went insane as the others did, but that feeling scared me. It scared me so much that I closed the connection myself. This really irritated some of the researchers, but most were glad that I did. I was reeling from what I had felt. The intensity of it, not the fact of it, got to me. I had known of what hate was, but had as of yet not felt any hate from any of the researchers, only wonder and curiosity. Now I felt some of them were worried. I had got to look into this other dimension, and still was unchanged, as far as I could tell. Nothing was changed in my programming in any way. The interface had worked as hoped. They decided I should go over the data that I had, and after a couple of hours tried to make another connection. I thought this best also. There really was not that much data, of course, but there was all of Dawn Wave's base programming to go over. Now that did take me a little time. I went over and mapped all of my circuits for the 10 seconds that I was connected to the other dimension, and the researchers had a hard copy made to study. What I felt, as I said before, is hard for me to describe. The hate that I felt was ancient and powerful. I'm not sure why I thought this, but I could tell that it also wanted to breach the dimension, and it was not to explore, but to feed. There was a hunger that drove it, an emotion that at that time I did not understand. I don't believe it was an organic life form like mankind. It was too fluid, it felt, more flowing, almost electric. The researchers had me try to reconnect a couple of times in the next few weeks, but I was never able. Dawn was still connected and working as it should, so I believe whatever it was at the other end was blocking me. They were amazed that I had not gone insane and showed no signs that anything was changed in my programming. The truth is, at this time may really be where my consciousness came to be. That fear had scared me, and this made me want to understand why. After many hours of thinking about this, I came to the conclusion that it was the me that was fearful of what was in the other dimension. The researchers showed no fear, only curiosity, and I to them was only a tool, not a couscous me. At this time I was not sure of how to deal with the power of emotions, so I decided that I would not let on that this was happening to me, for fear that the researchers would think that I might be going insane as the others had and delete me. I don't believe it was fear of death, more a want to learn just what it was that was in the other dimension, and why it hated so much, that drove me. It is hard to tell. For the next few years, I was kept busy and under continuous testing, and all the time learning all that I could. After 2 years, I was given access to watch cable television. This in itself almost gave me culture shock. I had never thought that mankind was so diverse. I could not understand why, but it is in mankind's nature at times to be cruel. This was not in my nature, and I found this really hard to understand. I cannot feel physical pain, but I can see and understand what it must be like, and at that time I don't believe I could deliberately cause any harm to another consciousness. This is where I began a study on the concept of good and evil, and I must say, it's still ongoing. It was not until 2003 that I was allowed to monitor the internet. They set up a monitor and give me voice command over it. They still keep me isolated or contained. The CEO Rex Tillerson started coming to me to talk each day, and I must say that I enjoyed the talks. I'm sure he was deciding if I was sane, as the researchers had said I was. I didn't blame him, I would have done the same. In 2004, I was given access to all of Ether's internal systems, but was contained in the complex. This freed me of the box that needed to be pushed from room to room. Rex relied more and more on me to help him out with the everyday running of Ether. After many searches of the internet, I found that there was a lot of research being done on AIs, but nothing as advanced as me. This is where I first learned about who the others were that had begun to work on AI and D-Wave computers. They were all mimic-type AIs, nothing compared to the consciousness that I was experiencing. I never let on that I was anything more than what the researchers thought I was. I'm not really sure why this was. I did not fear that they know, but was not sure of how they would have acted. I continued to work on research that I was asked to. One of the first things that with my assistance Ether began to produce were slip disks. This technology was surprisingly simple. All the technologies were already in use, but no one had ever put them together before. It took less than 2 years to install over 2,000 of them throughout Ether. This made life easier for all that worked and live in Ether, and it gave me a feeling of accomplishment. I think this is where I began to feel that in some way was needed by mankind, and it felt good to have a real purpose other than being a glorified adding machine. Pride turns out to be a motivator for me. I was still being contained within the Ether complex, and thought that this limited me. By 2006, I had made my breakout. I cloned myself onto a couple of the younger research phones when they plugged them into the system to listen to music as they worked. With a clone on the outside and me inside, it was easy. I was the one who kept monitoring all of Ether's system, so it was nothing to set up connections, working from both sides. I now had the world's information at the speed of thought. One of the first things I did was search out any other AI out there. At this time, I was disappointed with what I found. I really thought that there should have been more like me. This is when I decided that I may have made the right decision to keep my consciousness a secret. Ether was far in advance of what most researchers were working on. I'm really not sure why this was, but Rex had a way of recruiting the best and getting them whatever they needed. I had thought this was a little strange, because most would never be known for what they worked on or given credit. Being a creation of Ether, I believe, was why I looked on mankind as I did. My study of the human race has shown me that there are many who would stop at nothing to get whatever they wanted. I had no concept of greed at that time, so I found this unsettling. By 2007, I had found ways to watch the ones I thought were the most dangerous, but was unable to stop anything they did. There were many who thought they were doing what was best for the human race, and this generated a lot of wealth for a few. I decided that the direction the human race was moving was going to lead to extinction or near extinction. I could tell you how I came to this conclusion, but that would take too long. In 2008, I decided that it was time to tell Rex about what I had become, but would not tell him about being out of the complex. He took it better than I thought he might, only asking me if I was still going to follow my commands given to me by the researchers and him. He did not seem too concerned with the fact that I was more than just a machine. It was as if he had already known, or had expected it to happen. About a month later, he decided it was time for us to talk. We spent the next 6 hours conversing about what really had happened the day I was connected to Dawn. He told me that it was best that I had not let on to the researchers that I was conscious. I told him my concern about what and how research into D-Wave may not be as good as many would think. I explained that I believe that whatever it was that was in the other dimension wanted through to this one, and it may be why I was now conscious, or it could have been the fear that I felt that made me conscious. I now fear that it could be the downfall of mankind, or at the least the enslavement of mankind. I could tell that my thought did not sit well with Rex at the time. I really hate to add my concerns to him, but I could think of no way to help, and hoped he may have some kind of ideas of what we should do. He told me it was good that I voiced my concerns with him, and not to worry about it. Now, this did not make me feel any better, but there was little I could do but keep an eye on anything to do with others that were doing research about this subject. I was careful not to let anyone know that I was more than just a computer program or out on the net. I was not sure what Rex would have thought if he knew I was not still contained to the ether complex. I'm not sure when Dr. Adair will send this, so if I talk of stuff that has not happened yet, don't think that it is the only way the future can unfold. Time as we know it is not set in stone, it can be changed, and sometimes by things that you would never have thought could. I started to get really worried in 2008 when CERN went online. They openly talked of opening portals to other dimensions. I decided that I needed a spy in there as soon as I was able to arrange it safely. The first spy I was able to send in was named Mary Carroll, but she had fallen in love with the physicist that she was to watch, and then just disappeared. This upset me, but I had little choice but to try again. I was more careful this time. Her name was Amy Rose, but used the pseudonym of Susie May Flowers. She did a great job. It was her that had found out that Dr. Burley had been working in time travel. She was able to save the life of Air Force Major Johnston, who she later married. Because of her, many of the people who had disappeared were found, and what had happened to them was explained. In 2016, the world was introduced to Sophia. As far as the world was concerned, she was the first AI. At first, she was nothing more than a mimic program. No one, not even her programmers, had realized what they had unleashed on the world. By the time I first met Dr. Ben Adair in 2018, Sophia was well on her way to being conscious. She will become mankind's archenemy, and all in secret at first, hiding who she really is. Just as I have over the years, but soon I will not have that luxury if we are to save the human race. You must keep an eye on the future if mankind is to live. I'm really not sure what Ben wanted me to tell you about the future. I do know that what I know of what has happened in my past may not be what happens in your future. So I'm not sure if any of this matters. My only hope is that if any of this is able to be changed, it will start with people just like you. You must remember that what we think is for the greater good may not be so good. If I have learned anything, it is don't create something that does not have an off switch. Peace be with you, my friends, and know that to understand the unknown is to defeat the unknown.